Tonight on Reporting Scotland, the number of young people from disadvantaged areas who've applied to university has dropped. Claims that prescription of antidepressants to children and teenagers is doing more harm than good.
I could see people that around me all the time that weren't actually there, and I was hearing people in my head telling me to like hurt myself or hurt my current partner at that time and things like that.
Also on the programme, the court hears how a police officer was hit by a crossbow bolt during a siege at a house in Blantyre. Remembering the victims of the troop ship Tuscania torpedoed off Islay 100 years ago. And the former Scotland manager, Walter Smith, is on the list of candidates being considered for the post again. Good evening. The number of young people from the most disadvantaged parts of Scotland applying to go to university has fallen for the first time in a decade. Although the total number of applicants also fell, opposition politicians say it's a wake-up call to the Scottish Government. One of its top priorities has been to increase the number of students from disadvantaged backgrounds. Here's our education correspondent, Jamie McIver.
And you use your whole body weight to do the compressions, okay? So
Are these youngsters the university students of the future? Today, Glasgow Caledonian was playing host to some second and third year pupils. The school they go to is in a disadvantaged area, and this event is designed to help them choose careers and what to study.
We're kind of just wanting to get an idea of what different jobs we can get out of different subjects.
More like pathways on like if you take one subject, what you could do with it and the different jobs.
and I want you to run over the outside of this star with the pen.
By 2030, a fifth of students at all Scottish universities will have to come from the most disadvantaged areas. Glasgow Caledonian is one of just 2 universities which already meet this target, helped by an ambitious outreach scheme.
The Caledonian Club starts working as young as 3 years old. We work with families and we work right throughout primary and secondary, and we do a whole range of different activities. What you'll see is our mentors around the room. That's a key element of it, giving a positive role model, letting them engage with somebody from university so that they can understand that it's maybe not the scary place that they think it could be.
But the latest Scotland-wide figures actually show a small drop in the number of youngsters from disadvantaged areas applying to university. The drop was just 70, but given the Scottish Government's ambitious targets, the mere fact there was a drop is significant.
We have seen historic numbers of people from our most deprived communities going into university. Last year we saw a 13% increase. So the trajectory up until now has been good news, but this is about applicants applying to our universities. What we need to encourage the universities to do is ensure that those people who are applying now get the posts, and we see a further increase in the entrance later on this year.
There are 2 big issues. Raising attainment so more disadvantaged youngsters have a realistic chance of getting to university, and persuading more youngsters and their parents that university is a realistic ambition. The government's critics say today's figures are a wake-up call.
We've got very slow progress just now, and I think that that is something that is of crucial concern, particularly to youngsters who come from the more disadvantaged areas. We need to see improvements in literacy and numeracy because they unlock everything for other subjects. But also I do think it's about careers guidance. We get a very mixed message about careers guidance.
The figures today aren't final. In fact, it's possible the number of applicants from disadvantaged areas who actually get a university place this year will still rise. But the numbers demonstrate how big a challenge widening access to university is. Jamie McIver, Reporting Scotland.
The UK Transport Secretary has announced that Stagecoach, which runs the East Coast Main Line between Scotland and London, has suffered major financial losses, and the franchise can only run for a few months more. Chris Grayling said that he's ending the contract and organising a new arrangement to operate the railway, where our transport correspondent David Henderson joins me. What impact will this have, David?
Well, according to the UK government, this is not going to affect day-to-day operations on the railway, and it says there'll be no impact on services or staff on the East Coast Main Line. So the 20 million journeys that are made between Scotland and London every year. They should go on as before, we're told. But it's the Scottish company Stagecoach, which is the major partner delivering this service, which is really going to pay the price. MPs were told today that it had got its numbers wrong, that it had overbid for this contract. And the government says there'll be no question of a bailout for Stagecoach. Instead, we're told the company would lose £200 million. That's a fifth of its entire market value as a result of this deal. So it's taking a terrible hit, but it will be allowed to continue operating the service for now. But you know, this is the second time that the East Coast franchise has collapsed in less than a decade, and it's already led to some questioning whether private companies should be delivering public transport like rail services at all.
David, thank you very much for that. Thousands of children and teenagers in Scotland are being prescribed antidepressants, and the number is growing. But a leading expert in psychiatric medication has claimed it's doing more harm than good. However, his view is challenged. Here's our health and social care correspondent, Shelley Joffre.
New mum Amy Folan had serious mental health problems as a teenager. At 16, her GP prescribed antidepressants. Amy rapidly became suicidal.
Day 1, day 2 were okay. It was when it got to day 3, I was waking up in the middle of the night having really bad night terrors. I could see people around me all the time that weren't actually there, and I was hearing people in my head telling me to like hurt myself or hurt my current partner at that time and things like that, and it really got on top of me, and I ended up trying to swallow all of them. And if it wasn't for my partner at that time, then I probably wouldn't be here today.
More than 5,500 young people in Scotland were prescribed antidepressants last year. One expert is asking why, when the evidence base for under 18s is so poor.
There's been roughly 29 clinical trials that have been done, and in every single one of these, the drug has failed to produce an obvious benefit. Now, at the same time, in the same trials, in every single one of those trials, it has produced more harms than benefits, in the sense that it's made children become suicidal who wouldn't have become suicidal if they hadn't been put on these drugs.
The Royal College of Psychiatrists say prescribing guidelines for under 18s are evidence-based and no medicines are risk-free.
The art of good medicine is to make absolutely sure that we very carefully weigh whether the benefits of the medication outweigh the risks, and even more importantly, that we bear in mind what those potential risks and side effects might be, and observe very carefully so that we can manage them immediately if we start to see them.
Many young people say they've been helped by antidepressants, but Amy wants to see tighter controls.
I think they should only be given when they're actually needed, after somebody's been and seen a counsellor or a therapist and had loads and loads of sessions where that person can go, right, you need this kind of drug, this dosage, etc, etc. Other than that, then I don't think they're really needed, especially for people under the age of 18. It's ridiculous.
The body that represents the drugs manufacturers says the decision to prescribe is between doctors, their young patients and their parents. Shelley Joffre reporting, Scotland, Glasgow.
A court has heard how a police officer was hit by a bolt from a crossbow during a siege at a house in Blantyre. It ended when armed officers stormed the building last October, but not before it had been set on fire. Today, 37-year-old Christopher Hutchison pleaded guilty to charges of assault and willful fire-raising. Cameron Buttle reports.
Christopher Hutchison had been a carer for his father. 2 days after his father died from cancer, Hutchison was seen in his house in Blantyre with a loaded crossbow. Police threw up a cordon around the area. Armed officers and specialist paramedics were brought to the scene. The police helicopter deployed overhead. As the area was cleared, including 2 nearby primary schools, Hutchison fired bolts from the high-powered crossbow at officers. His girlfriend was also in the house. One bolt went through a door and hit an officer, injuring his arm. Eventually, Hutchison said he'd run out of bolts.
That's a police dog. That sounds like a shot.
The court heard that Hutchison was in self-destruct mode and yelled his neighbours better be out as he set fire to his home. A unit of specialist firearms officers moved in as the fire took hold. As the flames spread rapidly through the house, the officers burst in. Moments later, Hutchison and his girlfriend were taken out of the burning building. Hutchison pled guilty to assault charges and willful fire-raising. It emerged in court today that he already had a criminal past, and the judge said these were serious charges and warned him to expect a significant prison sentence when he returns to the dock next month for sentencing. Cameron Buttle, reporting Scotland.
A failure to provide an emergency ambulance contributed to the death of a newborn baby. A fatal accident inquiry into the death of Nevaeh Stewart ruled that and a number of other reasonable precautions might have avoided the baby's death. It happened at Montrose Royal Infirmary's Community Midwife Unit. Rebecca Curran is there for us tonight. Rebecca, what more can you tell us about the circumstances surrounding this?
Well, Nevaeh Stewart was born here as planned in September 2012. Her mother had been deemed low risk. But when the baby was born, she was pale and floppy and had significant breathing difficulties. A specialist neonatal ambulance was called that covers Ninewells Hospital in Dundee, but it had already been deployed to an emergency in Wick. Another ambulance arrived, but it was quickly turned away because it didn't have an incubator. When a second ambulance was then dispatched, a neonatal team arrived here, but it was around 2 hours after Nevaeh was born, and it was too late. She was pronounced dead around an hour later. At a fatal accident inquiry, her father Gary described this unit as an emergency response black spot, and I spoke with her mother Kimberly at the close of the fatal accident inquiry last year.
When we walked into that room, I'll never ever forget, just this tiny little baby. She'd fought so hard and so long, and she really, really did, and she didn't lose it till just before they arrived.
It's taken the sheriff a year to publish this determination. He's ruled that a failure to provide a 999 ambulance service to transfer unexpectedly unwell babies for specialist care is a defect in the system of working, which contributed to Nevaeh's death. The sheriff noted that special harnesses are now available in ambulance to strap in a very small baby, and also that a video link has been set up from this unit to Ninewells Hospital. Well, NHS Tayside has this evening released a statement. In it, they apologise to Nevaeh's parents for the distress and say they will take time to carefully consider the recommendations made. I spoke with Gary, Nevaeh's father, this evening. He says the family need more time to digest this determination before they make any further comment.
Rebecca, thank you. Flybe and Eastern Airways have announced they will stop operating flights between Glasgow and Stornoway from the beginning of March. The flights were introduced in September 2017 as competition began between the airlines and Loganair. Flybe have also scrapped their Aberdeen-Kirkwall service, where they were also competing with Loganair. Fresh efforts are to be made to locate the bodies of two fishermen who drowned in a sinking on Loch Fyne. The Nancy Glen sank on the 18th of January. One crew member was rescued by a passing boat, but Duncan McDougall and Shemek Travchek, who both lived in Tarbert, were lost. It's understood investigators will carry out a sonar sweep of the site to decide if the wreck can be raised. One man's fight to raise awareness of a condition that killed his wife and unborn child ended today with the launch of a government campaign. Sepsis kills 3,500 people in Scotland each year. Craig Stobo described today's launch as a milestone. Fiona Walker reports.
Query red flag sepsis, source is chest.
Every minute counts when sepsis sets in. It's when the body's reaction to an infection goes wrong.
We know that as they become more abnormal, so the pulse rate going up, blood pressure dropping, heart rate going up, then the patient is deteriorating.
That's how the medics look out for it, but you can look for symptoms too. That's what today's campaign is all about.
Things like the new change in mental state, so if they notice a loved one with an infection becoming confused, extreme shivering, it's called rigor, in response to a high or low temperature, the amount of urine that patients are passing reduces, and they can notice changes in the skin, mottling of the hands and feet particularly.
The campaign wouldn't have happened without this man. The BBC raised his case after his pregnant wife, who was a GP, died of sepsis. He was initially told a public campaign wasn't necessary.
Tonight, tomorrow, next week, next month, there will be people dying because of their inaction. It's a public health scandal.
But with the launch today, he thinks his wife Fiona would approve.
Fiona was a very dedicated doctor. She was a good, kind person, and she always believed that people had to take responsibility for their health. So the way I feel about it now is I can't change anything that's happened in the past, but I hope that if Fee was here, that she would think what we were doing was useful, and that's the spirit I'd like to go forward with in this campaign.
It can all start with something as simple as a chest infection or a urine infection. But here at this one A&E in Wishaw, they see patients with symptoms of sepsis 5 or 6 times a day. That's at least as often as heart attack and stroke symptoms.
Sadly, every 4 hours someone dies of sepsis, so it is a big killer, and that's why we're launching this campaign to help raise awareness of the symptoms.
It's hoped those numbers can be reduced by us all knowing when to act. Fiona Walker, reporting Scotland, Wishaw General Hospital.
It's 7:15. A reminder now of tonight's main story. The number of young people from the most disadvantaged parts of Scotland who are applying to university has fallen for the first time in a decade. And still to come, the collapse in Cardiff, how Scotland went from title hopefuls to disappointment. An island community has paid tribute to hundreds of soldiers and crew who lost their lives when a ship sank off its coast a century ago. The troop ship Tuscania was carrying American troops when it was torpedoed off Islay in the final year of the First World War. From there, here's our correspondent, Glenn Campbell.
The Tuscania was struck by a torpedo from a German U-boat as it steamed between Islay and Northern Ireland. Some of those who escaped the sinking ship on lifeboats were swept towards this treacherous coastline, where the American Red Cross would soon raise a permanent memorial.
Many of these lifeboats were swept by the weather onto the rocks of the O. You've got 400, 500, 600 foot cliffs there. Many of these boats were smashed on the rocks, and a lot of men were lost.
At the military cemetery near the village of Portellin, islanders gathered to remember the victims. Among the crowd, descendants of those who rescued survivors and cared for the dead.
The body's just been stiff as statues, been taken to the drill hall, a temporary mortuary, and then later on, when they were been taken away to be buried, the women standing as if it were their own, with the tears running from their eyes and their heads bowed. It was just a terrible tragedy at the time, combined with the loss of their own families.
The British crew of the Tuscania are buried here, close to where they were washed ashore. But the US soldiers, their bodies were exhumed and reinterred in the United States or in the American military cemetery in Surrey, with one exception. The family of 25-year-old Private Roy Muncaster insisted he be allowed to rest here, where the people of Islay buried him. Never before had this small island had to cope with such an enormous disaster. As the biggest single loss of American military lives since that country's civil war, it also had a big impact across the Atlantic.
The sinking of the Tuscania, with 2,500 troops on board, was an enormous event. The fact is that it had a devastating effect as suddenly people in America realised what they were involved in and what it was actually going to mean for the American public as well.
And these would not be the last Americans shipwrecked near Islay. This monument also commemorates those lost just 8 months later, when another troop carrier, the Otranto, was destroyed in a storm. Dan Campbell reporting Scotland, Islay.
There are now fewer than 4 weeks left until all paper Scottish £5 and £10 notes are withdrawn from circulation. People are being urged to spend or exchange the notes before the 1st of March. Issuing banks will still accept all Scottish money from customers after the deadline. The paper notes are being withdrawn following the introduction of plastic ones. I wonder how many the SFA have football now and the continuing search for the new Scotland manager. The SFA has revealed that there is a shortlist of 7 or 8. Well, Jane Lewis is at Hampden and there's one very familiar name there, Jane.
Well, Jackie, Hampden Park is the Scottish Football Association's headquarters, and it's where there'll be a busy time of it in the next few weeks as the search continues for not just a new manager but also for a new chief executive of the SFA. In terms of that managerial search there, that shortlist you mentioned has indeed thrown up a very interesting and a very well-known face, as you say, name, as you say. That's of Walter Smith. Smith was the Scotland manager back in 2004. He replaced Bertie Vokes, and he is on that shortlist to replace Gordon Smith. Now, Smith was formerly the manager at club level at Rangers and Everton, and actually left the Scotland job just over 2 years to return to manage Rangers. But he is under consideration for a return here, although it is fair to stress at this point, Jackie, there's been no formal or informal approaches for Smith or any of the other candidates who are on this shortlist.
So who are the other candidates then, Jane?
Well, interestingly enough, joining Smith on that shortlist is another former Scotland manager, that of Alex McLeish, who we know is very, very keen on the job. And another name who will be talked about at a board meeting here, not this week, but next week. There'll be a board meeting here to discuss that shortlist drawn up by the SFA. Another name is the current Kilmarnock manager, that of Steve Clarke. Now, Steve Clarke has completely transformed Kilmarnock since his return to club management here in nearly 4 months. He's leaded the sides to an impressive run indeed, including Saturday's win over Celtic. So busy times ahead here at the National Stadium, the SFA's headquarters. That board meeting I talked about will take place next week. They'll talk about the vacant managerial job. They'll also discuss, Jackie, the vacant SFA chief executive job as well. Remember, Stuart Regan resigned last week. I am told that at the minute there are no early front runners for the chief executive's job, though.
Thank you very much, Jane. Well, to the national rugby team now, and at this early stage of the Six Nations, Scotland doesn't have its problems to seek. The team must beat France on Sunday to avoid a potential last place finish. Well, that's the view of former Scotland and Lions centre Scott Hastings. The Scots opened their campaign with a 34-7 thrashing by Wales in Cardiff. More from our rugby reporter Andy Burke.
Cardiff remains a place of little joy for Scottish rugby.
What a difference a game makes. Scotland, full of hope and expectation just hours earlier, shell-shocked.
Obviously it got to us because we didn't play anything like we know we can play, and we have played. Like we need to have a response throughout this week. One team loses, one team wins whenever there's a game of rugby. But that was miles below what we know we're capable of.
The Scots have become known for their flair, their ferocious tempo, their try-scoring prowess. It was all missing in Cardiff.
Scotland, clueless in a way, that they thought that they could just go wide and everything would open up and Wales would capitulate. You always rely on a brains trust of a side to go, look, lads, we just need to change it a little bit. Yeah. But they just stuck to something that they believed would work without kind of thinking about it and being smart. And they deserved everything they got.
Well, what they got is what they tend to get when they travel away from home in this competition. Nothing. Since the Five Nations became 6 in 2000, the Scots have won just 6 of 46 away matches, 4 of those coming against Italy. They've beaten Ireland and Wales away from home only once each and have never won in England or France.
Suddenly the axis of the whole Six Nations from a Scotland perspective changes from being title contenders to, we could be up against a wooden spoon against Italy in the last game of the championship. Now, to avoid that, they have to win on Sunday. They can do it.
The French will arrive in Edinburgh nursing their own wounds after this last gasp victory for Ireland in Paris.
stolen the game.
Like Scotland, these players know only a win at Murrayfield on Sunday will keep their championship hopes alive. Andy Burke, reporting Scotland.
Well, let's get the weather now, and it's over to Christopher.
Jackie, thank you. Hello there. Well, there was some sunshine around today, but it was in short supply. For many of us, rather leaden skies, fairly cloudy, fairly cool, but change on the way tonight with a wintry spell of weather, some snow on the way. Here's the latest rain and snow radar. You can see this band out towards the west. That's going to move eastwards overnight, meeting the cold air and giving a spell of snow. Because of that, we have a Met Office yellow be aware warning in force for the risk of snow and ice. So here it is. You can see 7, 8 o'clock tonight, that rain and snow moving its way eastwards across the country, and there will be some snow to all levels, a few centimetres here and there in towns and cities, more on the hills and high ground, and some of the higher road routes, perhaps some challenging conditions at times. But by the end of the night, it's on its way out. We're left, though, with a legacy of cold, frosty and icy conditions. Temperatures there overnight well below freezing in places. So it's a cold start to the day tomorrow. Most of the snow has gone, but there will still be some on the ground, perhaps some difficult conditions where roads aren't cleared. And again, quite frosty, quite slippery. But for most of the day tomorrow, bright and sunny, crisp and cold. By mid-afternoon, despite some sunshine overhead, well, 2 or 3 Celsius is probably about the best you're going to get. Perhaps a touch milder towards the west coast. Winds generally light to moderate for central, southern and eastern parts, but in the northwest, a blustery northwesterly and frequent snow showers here, and in fact all the way down towards parts of Galloway. But certainly in the northwest is where most of them will be. Some hail, some thunder in the mix at times. Elsewhere, though, as I say, bright and sunny, but cold. Rest of the afternoon into the evening, and those showers in the northwest just merging together, pepping up somewhat. So a spell of snow across western parts of the country briefly, but then clearing. And actually overnight tomorrow night will be really cold in the countryside, perhaps down to -12. Town and cities, -4, -5. Wednesday, and some further rain pushing in off the Atlantic, but some milder air mixed in, so probably will be rain for most. A fairly cloudy day, quite a cold day once again for central and eastern parts because the mild air isn't coming your way until after dark. So cold, cloudy and, well, 2 or 3 Celsius. Further west, there's the rain and there's the milder air, 8 degrees in Stornoway. And certainly come Thursday, we'll all be into something just a little bit milder. A few showers, a few bright spells, the best of those likely in the east and northeast. That's the forecast for now, but join us tomorrow night where we'll be able to show you some brand new weather graphics. Tune in if you can.
You tease. Thank you very much. Thank you for that, Christopher. And that's Reporting Scotland. I'm back with the headlines at 8 and our late bulletin just after the 10 o'clock news. Until then, from all the team, good evening.